Hi, folks. Welcome back and welcome to Molly's Young Fest. Hi, Molly. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Really fun.
Always a pleasure to have you here. We're here taking your questions as normal. Even though Stephanie's not here, we're still taking your questions at Velshirule at ms.now, Velshirule at ms.now, or you can stick questions into the chat on YouTube and on TikTok. There are no questions that are off limits or that you can't
Yes.
ask. Largely, Molly, because I think people worry that maybe their question's not smart enough, or maybe they're missing something, or the question might sound dumb. There's no possibility of that anymore, right? There's no
We,
all of our questions sound dumb because we ask questions like, why are we in this war with Iran? Why are prices the way they are? Why is Donald Trump talking about the ballroom all the time? Why it's all nonsensical.
right. This is a callback to our text message exchange where I wrote to you, I am just shocked at the level of stupid
Yes.
at every point, what has happened. And that's why you shouldn't feel
Yeah,
worried at
don't feel
all
bad. If
to
you don't get
write
it,
in. Yeah,
you're in
we
great
don't
company.
either. And right. I mean, and even Axios had reporting that an advisor of Trump said he does this 12-dimensional chess where he says a different thing to everything. He keeps saying different things, and it's to keep you guessing.
Yes.
Is it to keep you
No,
guessing?
no, no. This crazy like a fox stuff is nonsense, right? We've been battling with this for 10 years. Is he much smarter than the rest of us? I'll give him this. He understands how to use and manipulate the media well. I would argue that some of us are getting better at not being manipulated by
Hmm.
him. But he does get that. He knows how to get people chasing their tails. He knows how to do things to get you off a story. There are
Hmm.
people who, reasonably or otherwise, I have no reason to think they're not, refer to this thing that we're doing in Iran as the Epstein War, right? 'Cause it could be.
Right.
You can't not cover a war when there are missiles and they hit people and they hit your allies and they kill people and oil's not getting through. You can't not cover it. You can't decide,
Yeah.
well, this is a distraction to Epstein, so I'm not covering it. And he's good at giving you just enough to cover to not be talking about other things.
Right. And you'll remember we saw him do this thing where he called up all these different reporters on the phone. And because it's the president of the United States calling you on the phone
You take
and
the call.
you're a reporter,
Yeah.
you have to treat that like a scoop, even
Yes.
though one phone call is the war is over and one phone call is we're set,
Yes.
every story was totally conflicting the story before it.
But when you think about wars in this country, and you and I have the benefit of having seen some of them,
Yes.
lived through some of them, and then we remember the others, right? We remember the ones that were sort of before us, Vietnam and World War II and World War One and these other various incursions that we had. I've never read of or understood a war in which there was less clarity about
Right.
what it is, including the word war, which Donald Trump said the quiet part out loud when he said, I'm not supposed to call it a war because if it's a war, you're supposed to get approval for it. So he
Right.
has some word some phrase that's very much like what Vladimir Putin said about the invasion of Ukraine. That's not technically a war. And if you actually have signs in Ukraine that call it a war, you can get arrested. If you're a journalist who says war on TV, you can get arrested. So now we do this stupid thing as well.
Hmm.
Listen to what Trump said about this. This is his own words, not edited. This is what Donald Trump said about what's going on in Iran.
They want to deflect from all of the tremendous success that we're having in this military operation. I won't use the word war because they say if you use the word war, that's maybe not a good thing to do. They don't like the word war because you're supposed to get approval. So I'll use the word military operation, which is really what it is. Called a military decimation.
You remember what they called Vietnam? Vietnam was not a war. It was
Right.
a police action.
That's right.
I think they used some term like that in Venezuela. It was a law enforcement action. This is all bullshit.
Yes. I also you never want Vietnam to be what the war reminds you of. Like,
Correct.
we can have mixed feelings about a lot of different wars, but Vietnam, there's almost no one who doesn't say that was just the quagmire to end all quagmires.
Right.
So, not great.
Right. And then more recently, Afghanistan, which he's the one who cut the deal to give it back to the Taliban, becomes
Right.
another example of, can we just have clarity? There's polling that's out there that indicates how people feel against, how people feel about putting troops on the ground. I want to ask Christina for that. There's a poll that says, would you favor or oppose sending U.S. ground troops to the war in Iran? I think this is very telling right now, because
Yes.
ground troops is not video game war, right? That's
there we
that's
go.
people's children. So 76% of Americans oppose this, 18% favor. Look at the split when it comes to
This is
Republicans,
an
Democrats.
80-20 issue. We're always looking for an 80-20 issue,
Right,
and
right.
we found
There aren't that
it.
many 80-20 issues, right?
Yeah.
Where people say, no, this is just a bad idea. It might be better that the number of people who favor troops on the ground, that's a very hard bar for Americans, but the number of people who favor it could go up if someone could explain what this actually is. Look at the numbers on independents, by the way. 83% oppose and 12% support putting troops on the ground. I'm actually surprised that 4% of Democrats support putting troops on the ground. We know what happens when you put troops on the ground in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Vietnam, in these places. Unfortunately, they die.
Yeah. No, and I think, look, when you look at Gulf War I and Gulf War II, there was a sales pitch, right? Weapons of mass destruction.
Yes.
There was, we're doing this for something. And this has been so back and forth. The messaging has been all over the place. You had Marco Rubio saying it was Israel, which is, the single probably, scariest moment of this, because it then, for any number of reasons, you saw reporting that MBS wanted it.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen the administration give a number of different answers. One was that they were 2 weeks away. One was it was a few days away. Donald Trump said he feels it in his bones. He had all these sort of vibes-based reasons to go to war. Tends to be vibes-based is not the best way to decide your international diplomacy.
And this one is unusual because not knowing what the reason is for the war, there are consequences to it that we are facing right now. And I want to put up, not that I need to put this up, this is probably the graphic one least needs to see, because everybody knows exactly what they pay for gas in this country, because there's a big sign for it all the time. $4.02 a gallon. We're not done, by the way, because gas prices are on a lag on oil prices, and oil prices are still higher. So we're probably going up higher than that. Take a look at the number underneath. Not many of us drive diesel cars these days, but it's $5.45 a gallon. You know who uses diesel? Trucks, agricultural workers, farms use diesel to power all their machinery. So you're paying $4 a gallon. In California, it's $5.70 or something a gallon. You're paying these prices to fill your car up and run your errands and go to your work and things like that. But every airline ticket you buy, all the food that comes from a farm to your market to your grocery store, so you're paying twice. Just to be clear,
Right.
You're not just paying for your gas. All your prices, which is part of this affordability question and part of inflation, are also going up as well. Again, Molly, if someone could convince me that there was some existential threat to America, which Donald Trump hinted at during the State of the Union, that Iran's going to have ballistic missiles that can soon reach America, there's no truth to that at all. None whatsoever.
No.
So
And
what are we
in
doing
fact,
this for?
he's actually disagreeing with himself, because
Yes.
the earlier White House said they had bombed the nuclear program and that it was gone.
Obliterated it, they said.
Obliterated. So it
So
didn't
did
just
you?
right. And that, I think, is important. I want to also just go back to the gas prices for 1 second, because there's a really good piece in the New York Times yesterday about the direct correlation between higher gas prices and presidential approval. And that, in fact, part of the reason why W could not get reelected had to do with the war, with the Gulf War making gas more expensive.
Right.
And that this is just, voters are not necessarily voting on this, on the kind of high-minded issues that a lot
Correct.
of us might want them to, like democracy and the rule of law. They're actually just voting on what it looks like when you fill your car
Remember
with gas.
November, the election in Manhattan, in New York.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
People didn't care. People don't care that Zoran Mamdani is a Democratic socialist.
No.
Most people in New York are not Democratic socialists. They don't care. He said he's going to bring he said the rent's too damn high.
Yeah.
right? The price of eggs is too damn high, and that's exactly right. But at least you make this point, and we can't get away from it. With Iraq, whether the Bush administration was lying or whether they were lying to themselves or whether they knew it or they didn't know it, they understood that there needed to be some effort to convince the public, Congress, the United Nations. 2 times they went to the
Yeah,
UN
that's right.
and deliver speeches about why this was necessary. Nobody did this for Venezuela. Nobody did it for Iran, and nobody's doing it for Cuba, which I feel is next. We got a question from Bobby in the chat. Please remember to put your questions in the chat
Yeah.
or send them to velshirule@ms.now. What do Middle East countries and European countries do if the strait is still closed in June? It's a good question.
It's a really good question.
I'm puzzled as to why. Like, I don't think you. I've done a lot of history on Iran, right? I was there when the deal was made. I've really read it. I really know a lot about it. But you don't have to know anything about it. You actually have to know nothing about it. You
Right.
need either a pamphlet or Google Maps, and you just say,
Right.
"Huh, this is weird." Like a fifth of the world's gasoline and natural gas and oil goes through this little narrow strait that Iran can control. Well, that feels like a bit of a logistical problem to me, right? That's not high science. Anybody could have foreseen this. And the administration says, well, when we obliterated their stuff in June, they didn't close the Strait of Hormuz. Hence, they must never plan to close the Strait of Hormuz. That's not military strategy, Molly. That's you and me sitting having a coffee and saying, oh, maybe they won't close the Strait of Hormuz.
I mean, but also everyone you talk to about that area says the same thing. I mean, for years and years and years, it's just been conventional wisdom. You can't get into war with Iran because of the Straits of Hormuz, because they will close the straits.
Yeah.
And then, oil and gas, which is fungible, will go way up because a fifth of it will be gone.
Right.
I think is so interesting about this, right? So the basic threat right now, Donald Trump is threatening to send troops to this Karg Island, which is on the straits, which is how the Iranians control the flow of oil.
Yeah.
It is everyone you talk to, and you see the Pentagon leaking a lot because I think people are really worried that they think this is a bad idea.
And while you're saying this, Christine, let's put on that the map of the Strait of Hormuz so we can talk about this.
Yeah. I mean, everyone thinks this is a bad, bad, bad idea. Not enough troops to secure it. Just they're sitting ducks. You hear this again and again. So the question, I think, is, first of all, yes. And right now, the straits are sort of closed-ish, right? They're letting in a few Chinese ships. They're charging a little bit of money.
Pakistan is trying to negotiate between America and Iran, so some like 10 or 20 Pakistani tankers are getting in and out.
The Economist calls it the Ayatollah. Very British humor.
That's good.
But yeah, so right now, but remember, like just before this started, we just had the straits open. And now they're sort of musing, maybe sending, sort of charging $2 million a ship, something like that.
Yeah. So someone's paying for that, right? This isn't some shipper who's going to pay for it. That's going into your gas prices or somebody's prices that gets passed on to you. So the question about what are Middle East countries going to do? So take a look at this. The Strait of Hormuz, around the center of your screen. It's the bottom right. It's where what used to be called the Persian Gulf, but in the Gulf Wars, America renamed it the Arabian Gulf, but it's the same Gulf. It's that water between all those countries. It's how it gets out to sea. Now, Karg Island, which you mentioned, is sort of more toward the top, right? It's a little bit higher.
Right.
Karg Island, I don't know how to describe it. It's the center of all oil operations for Iran.
Have you been there?
I've not been to Karg. I've been to the Strait of Hormuz part of it.
Okay.
Karg is two things. It's military installations designed to protect the actual oil installations and oil installations, which we haven't bombed yet.
Right.
In theory, we've bombed the military. We've hit the military installations, but not the oil installations. In theory, if you hit those, and Lindsey Graham and others are arguing for not only hitting them, but sending the Marines in and taking it over. What you do is you cripple Iran's oil production. But here's the problem. Oil can't get out. So countries like Qatar, and Qatar is natural gas, not oil, but Saudi Arabia, all these countries, what they're doing is they're lowering their production of oil because there's nowhere to put it. Right?
Right.
Oil is a very efficient system. You refine it, it goes into tanks, it goes into tankers. The tankers go out to sea. We don't generally have oil sitting around. We have strategic petroleum reserves around the world, but generally speaking, you have to produce your oil and it has to go to market. And so they're reducing the amount of oil that's being produced. So if this goes on, as our question asked, until June, you will have less oil in the world and the prices of oil will go up. So I don't see how this ends. Donald Trump keeps saying that it'll end in 2 weeks. He's been saying 2 weeks for a few weeks now, right?
Like COVID.
And he's trying to convince everybody, right, he gave 15 days to end COVID. If true, that might be interesting. But what a lot of people point out to me is whether or not you like Iran, and you have a lot of reasons to dislike Iran. They murder their own people. It's a horrible regime. They now have a vote in how and when this ends. And so if we're not negotiating an end to it with them and they don't feel like 2 weeks is the end of this thing, might not be 2 weeks. We don't know who's in charge. Donald Trump keeps talking about the regime change president who's in charge. Last I checked, the president is the same president who was there before the attack started. So all of this is very unclear. And then and here's the cherry on top. The brain trust of Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are negotiating this thing.
And I want to add that you saw the Iranians said, or whoever is sort of the mouthpiece of the regime right now, same regime as was before.
Same regime, yes.
Right. Said that they don't want to negotiate anymore with Kushner and with Witkoff. Remember, again, how unusual it is to have the son-in-law of the president and one of
with
his
no
buddies,
official role, with no official role.
Right. And one of his buddies go in there, like, they could be, I mean, think about like the people we know who have trained their whole lives for this kind of negotiation, who have been vetted, who have clearance so that they're not compromising.
The Wendy Shermans of the world. Like they know these things. They've read all the briefing books. They know the players. They know the data. The Ernie Moniz, the energy secretary, who, he negotiated the last Iran deal because he knows what uranium enrichment looks like. No, we got the golfer and the volunteer buddy.
Right. Remember, Jared Kushner is also raising money for his fund in the Middle East. So while he's doing this, he's also negotiating.
$5 billion.
Yes. But also just the idea that you're in private business, but also you do a little government on the side. And you do Middle East peace. It's so inappropriate, but it's also, you just don't know where they're coming from. And neither do the Iranians.
Yes. And they're like, can we talk to somebody serious? Can we talk to somebody who's actually in charge of the... Jon Stewart had a thing the other day where Trump was asked about something and he started talking about the ballroom and he's saying, the Iranians must be sitting around saying, is this really the guy in charge? Can we just talk to the guy who's actually in charge of this? We'd like to negotiate with somebody like who isn't carrying on about ballrooms. I got a question from the chat.
And the joke is he's almost more in charge than any previous president because of the unitary executive theory.
Correct.
He has more power than any other president.
There's a reason he hasn't asked Congress for permission for this war. It's not that he won't get it. It's entirely possible he might, probably won't, but he might. He just doesn't want to ask. He's setting this up so that when he goes into Cuba and Greenland and maybe Canada, he set up the expectation that I don't ask permission to go to war. We've got a question here. How do you perceive Trump saying, go get your oil to our NATO allies who are not included in the initiation of this excursion? Excursion in quotes, because he doesn't call it a war. It's an excursion. It's an excellent question. So Donald Trump's giving a live address from the Oval Office tonight in which he says he will talk about how disgusting NATO is. So I think you can get a sense of where that's going. Molly, I like to point out for our viewers and listeners who aren't very steeped in NATO, and NATO is one of those great things that you didn't have to be steeped in. It existed to keep us all safe, and you didn't have to care about it. But Article 5 of NATO, we all know, is the article that says an attack on one is an attack on all. If you attack one NATO country, the others are compelled to respond as if they were attacked. In the entirety of NATO, Article 1 has been invoked one time and one time only. It was after 9/11 in defense of the United States. Canada, Great Britain, Sweden, Denmark, all these countries sent soldiers to fight and die in Afghanistan for America. So Donald Trump keeps on saying, I don't think they'd answer the call if we called NATO. I don't think they'd respond. It's like they're the only ones who ever got called, and they're the only ones who ever responded. And NATO is the greatest military alliance in the history of the world. Now, this is saying something, because that means we're taking into account the Egyptian Empire, the Persian Empire, which was the biggest in all of history, the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire. All of these, when you forget the empire part, but they were military alliances. There's been no military alliance in the history of the world more powerful and broader than NATO. And we are not only a member of it, we are de facto its leader. This is what keeps us safe.
And it's also like, this didn't happen in a vacuum. Donald Trump wasn't being great to our NATO allies, right? He wasn't, like, before this, he was musing about taking Greenland.
Correct.
And they sent troops to Greenland because there was so much anxiety about Donald Trump taking Greenland, which is in itself completely insane. And you had NATO really worried. You had the Munich Security Conference, where I talked to Ann Applebaum from the Atlantic, who's very smart, and she was talking about how she and her husband is in the Polish government, was talking about how the rest of the world was just in terror about what he was cooking up, and that it did feel like he wanted to end NATO. Fast forward, he does this military exercise. He doesn't ask anyone. I mean, even W went and put together a coalition.
Huge coalition.
And then here we are.
And so he says to these countries, go get your oil. And they're like, I don't know. There was no problem getting my oil until you went and did this thing that you didn't tell any of us about. And if you hadn't done this, the oil would still be flowing. And here's the thing. It's a trap that Donald Trump and Republicans are using to get Democrats to defend Iran. Now, two things to say. One is, it is kind of weird that Trump says something about negotiations and we wait for the Iranians to confirm whether or not that's true, because on certain days the Iranians are more reliable about this than our administration.
Which is a very sad,
wild thing to
affairs.
say.
Yeah.
But you could have no love for the Iranian regime and really want them to go. And by the way, a lot of Iranian expats in the United States are of that view, that they should keep bombing them and get rid of this regime. It's not a practicality at the moment, because that regime is so entrenched in Iran. It's very hard to get rid of them. But you don't have to like Iran to think that this war was a bad idea. There are lots of countries in the world that are bad. They're just bad for their people. They're not democracies. We need to be a little more strategic about where we get into wars. But a lot of people thought that's what we were doing by electing Donald Trump, a guy who said he wasn't going to get into war. So the Iranians are like, we don't want to talk to Witkoff and Kushner. We would like to talk to J.D. Vance. Yeah.
I also think that when you look at this moment with Trump and the nation building, and now he's going to go after NATO, which is always, it's just interesting to me. First of all, he's always been so hostile towards NATO. And then he wants NATO to rescue him. And I think back to when this bombing started in Iran, and he was like, to the Iranian people, like, you're going to be able to overthrow the government soon.
We got your back. Take your chance. The best chance you're ever going to have.
And it never happened. And so, like, I do think he floats stuff. Like, he says, like, now maybe someone will rescue me. It's like, it feels like peak Nepo baby. You know, you had a rich father. Sometimes you'd get in trouble and he'd rescue you. Like, let's try it again.
Let's listen to some people and their questions, because I think you make a really good point. We'd like this to be a high-minded conversation about how we deal with nation building, how we deal with countries that are a threat. But in the end, this is going to come down to gas, which is now more than $4 a gallon. We asked some people some questions about gas prices. Let's play some of their responses.
If you could pick one word to describe the state of the economy right now, what would that one word be?
All fucked up.
A tragedy. Sad. Disappointing.
It's not the way it used to be. I don't know, man. It's like survival right now. Everybody on survival mood right now.
Desolate, man. It's bad.
We voted for him to be, like we say in Spanish, somebody with cojones. You know what I'm saying? With some balls to get in there and be daddy. Take the belt put everything in action, because now you can see that we are respected across the world again, right?
I don't know. Are we daddy?
That last clip, you and I have now watched that last clip 3 times, and it gets me more upset. It just feels, it does not feel like it's totally about politics, you know?
Right,
Like, but yeah, and when you talk to people, you travel a lot, and you are actually Canadian, so you probably talk to a lot of people who are not Americans, and
Yeah.
they're in a state of just total shock.
Yeah, they're not
right?
thinking. Canadians have a love-hate relationship. It's much more love than hate with America, right? They love it. They consume American popular culture. They get it. They don't get this part of it, right? They've always understood that they're a mouse sleeping next to an elephant, right?
Right.
America's the bigger partner. It's always going to be the way it is. But they vacation in America. They love Americans. They don't get this part. It's like how America feels like it's coming unwound.
Yeah.
And by the way, this goes back to January 6th, right? Because that's the thing you never thought would happen in America, and it happened. And then you're like, this doesn't seem strategic. And I have to say, it doesn't. Notwithstanding the fact that there's a whole nother story about Pete Hegseth now, and the fact that his stockbroker was trying to get his hands on defense stocks
NFT,
before-
ETFs.
Yeah, before the war. Right. So
Yeah.
did the stockbroker just sort of know that, or how did that work? Financial Times has some great reporting on that. But putting aside that, which is, if true, illegal and dangerous, and we should be looking into it, the way he conducts himself in talking about this war, there are Republicans who have said to us they're embarrassed by it. There are military people who are saying they're embarrassed by this tough talk. He puts a lot of religious connotations into it, but he talks like he's playing a video game. And yet we've now had 13 bodies come home.
And we see that this administration online basically treats it like a video game. Like we'll see video that's interspersed with video game stuff or video game effects, which is very disturbing to a lot of people. But even like the last briefing with the Gang of Eight, you saw Republican senators come out and be like, what are we doing here? Like, right. I mean, like Roger Marshall, right? Marshall would say, saying like that we did not get enough information for this to make sense.
So there have been a number of conservatives who have come out either against this war or against the lack of clarity that's happening. One of them was Eric Prince. I want to play a few of them together, but Eric Prince was the head of Blackwater. He's
a defense contractor.
Correct. He lives and breathes and succeeds on the basis of there being wars and there not being enough soldiers, and you get whatever his new company's called. But they hire these guys. Like their worlds are generally better when there's a lot of conflict in the world. Listen to what some of these folks have been saying about this war.
I counseled as loud as possible against doing this in the first place.
Just please do this. Don't nation build.
As this thing goes south, we need to know exactly who talked him into it and what representations were made to convince the president that this was a good idea.
Megyn Kelly's playing all sides of the fence there. It's like, that's not actually what we need to know. We need to know why we're in this war and how do we get out of this war. I don't need to know that it was Stephen Miller or Steve Bannon or whoever it was. I actually need this to stop.
And Laura Ingraham said a very similar thing last night. She said, or the night before, she said something to the effect of like, whoever is advising him is doing a terrible job.
Right. That I'm past that.
Right.
You're the president of the United States. You put people in harm's way. I wonder how much of it, by the way, you can send your questions in the chat or email them to velshirule@ms.now. velshirule@ms.now. I wonder whether the Venezuela thing got him going, right? Because he talked about it at the State of the Union about how they just, went down in the helicopters and they got him, and he tried to close the door, Maduro, and they couldn't close the door, and then they got him. Poor Maduro, man, he's sitting in a jail in New York thinking, what happened?
His wife?
Did you guys forget about me? I was the biggest story in the world. Like I was the guy you caught, and now you completely moved on to something else. I wonder whether someone, and I've heard that Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, did not try to convince anyone that this would be easy because, like I said, you don't have to study Iran. You just need a pamphlet and Google Maps to understand this is going to be difficult. It's a country of 93 million people. It is not, for whatever everyone wants to call it, a backward country. It's a highly industrialized country in which a very large percentage of the population is educated. They have startups, they have engineers, they have remarkable hacking capability, which would make this an asymmetric war. I don't know whether he just thought a few people are going to rappel down helicopters and pick up the Ayatollah, and winch him into a helicopter, and that would be the end of it. And I don't know whether they thought about what happens. You could take the Ayatollah out and the top 50 people, I don't know how many people they say they've killed, and you still got the Iranian regime because the system is built in a way that civil society does not exist like it exists in North America. Everybody's in the party, and it's many, 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 many layers down. I don't know how many people you have to take out, and Donald Trump keeps saying, we'll take them all out. At some point, you have to have somebody to negotiate with, right? You've got to have somebody who actually enjoys some sort of popular support, who will say, we will lay down our arms, or we'll change our nuclear system, or whatever it is. We're eliminating the possibility of negotiating with people who, by the way, if you're in the Iranian regime right now, Molly, you know that this is existential. Because if you fail, they will drag you through the streets. There'll be no going to third countries and stuff. You're dead and finished. So their motivation to fight to the death now is very high.
And it's also a very religious country that is founded on, or not founded, but this, since the Ayatollah came to power, it has been a very religious state. The leadership is religious. It's I do think that Trump was really emboldened after Venezuela. It was fast. It was successful. He could say it was regime change, though it's exactly the same regime.
The number two person is now the number one person.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what that did.
Literally exactly the same regime.
Yeah. And then you have Maduro in a jail in New York, with his wife. Yeah. I don't know, by the way, how this works. It's like a complete international incident. Yeah. Because America's just going to start taking leaders of places. Yeah. But I also think that when you look at the problem of this at this moment and the inability to back out, and I think what you're seeing with Trump is like he's just sort of pushing on the doors, trying to find an exit to this thing. And I don't know that there is. Because with the straits the way they are now, if the Ayatollah decides to do a toll or something like that, that will then may very well beget numerous tolls and various other. The lesson basically is if America decides to attack you.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the Houthis have the Bab el-Mandab, which is the Red Sea. They've got something similar there. That's a closure point that leads to Egypt and the Mediterranean. They can do it there. We have a U.S. base in Djibouti, which is across the lake, across the ocean from them. But it's very close. But again, is this what we're going to get into? Somebody asked the other day, does the U.S. Navy have the ability to manage this? And it's like, well, they do.
Right.
But it's bad use of the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy's not in Taiwan right now. China's sitting there getting itchy fingers thinking, what a great time for us to take Taiwan because all these carriers are elsewhere. We have a question.
It also just goes to this idea, these people voted for Trump because he said, we're not going to be the world's policeman. Right. We're not going to build democracies. We're not going to. Yeah. But
Democrats like this sort of thing, right? Democrats like the let's build democracies around the world and all that kind of stuff. These guys said, this is not our business. We're not into this at all. And now we're doing it. Viking Girl 18 sending us a message on the chat saying, can Velshi discuss the economic impact to the world right now with regard to running out of oil in parts of the world? Okay, really good question. Generally speaking, we're not running out of oil in the world. We are using more than we produce on a daily basis, but there are surpluses all over the place. We have 4 big salt vats. I've been to see them. They're in Texas and Louisiana in the United States that have several 100 million gallons of oil in them, barrels of oil in them, and those exist all over the world. So we're not running out of oil yet. We also have the ability, OPEC and OPEC Plus and the United States all have the ability to generate more oil. We don't produce as much as we can produce because when you produce as much as you can produce, it brings the price of oil too low. So, I'm sure you're sitting there saying, what's too low? I'll tell you what's too low. About $60 a barrel is too low because if you just drill like you drill in Texas or Saudi Arabia, where you drill a hole in the ground and like Beverly Hillbillies, the oil just comes out, that's very inexpensive. That's about $15 a barrel to make oil like that. But much of our oil today comes from offshore. It comes from oil sands in Canada. It comes from fracking, and that's very expensive. The way you get oil out of the ground that way, much more expensive. So you need oil to be about $60 a barrel to make it profitable for these companies to make oil. So as long as oil is above $60 a barrel, you can make more oil. At $100 a barrel, which is where we are now, more than 100, it's quite easy to make more oil. So we're not short of oil in the world at the moment. That's number one. It's just we have to make more oil. And what you do, if you want to ramp up all these oil production facilities, you got to ramp them up for a long time, not for 2 weeks. So if Trump says the war is going to be over in 2 weeks, no one is going to get their operations up and running to do that. There are issues with shipping the oil, right? America is not a net importer of oil. So if no oil went through the Strait of Hormuz, America would have enough oil. America has its full supply of natural gas. All the natural gas America uses, it makes. So it doesn't affect us here, but these things are priced internationally. So where there is a shortage of oil somewhere in the world, i.e. China or India, the price for all of us goes up because oil is traded on an international market on the understanding that you buy the oil, it can go on a ship, and it can go anywhere in the world. So we don't technically have a shortage. We do technically have an ability to increase the production of oil, but that requires certainty. If we knew this was a 3-year war, we might do that. If it's going to be a 2-week war, we might not do that. And again, the final point I want to make here is that oil-producing countries in the Gulf of the Arabian Gulf or the Persian Gulf, whatever you want to call it, they are lowering their production because there's nowhere to put that oil. If Saudi makes more oil, there's no storage facilities to put it in, and you can't keep putting it on the ships because the ships are full and they can't get out. So it's a logistics problem. This is a lot more like COVID than it is an oil crisis.
And it's another place where instability is undermining Trumpism, right?
Correct.
Like if you think about the tariffs,
Yeah.
tariffs are a really good example, was meant to, I mean, I think it was more about crony capitalism and trying to put his finger on the scale, but the thesis behind it was that it was going to onshore manufacturing. What happened? Nobody's going to build a
They
factory.
don't build stuff when you don't know if your laws are going to be in place 3 months from now. If the Supreme Court's going to approve what you're doing. If you're throwing out all the immigrants who are your workforce. This is like Turkey or Argentina now. There's a reason people don't build in those countries because I don't know what's going to happen next. America was stable. If your government changed, if it went from a Democrat to a Republican, maybe your tax rates would change on the margins, but the civil service was there, the approvals were there, the judiciary was there. It was safe and stable to do business. We're actually undermining that.
Yeah. And I think that that's ultimately what's sort of unraveling this problem.
Yes.
Also with the tariffs, by the way, those tariffs were illegal. Now we have these huge lawsuits.
Yep.
And also manufacturing jobs have gone down.
Yes, correct.
In the United States.
Because first of all, why would you, right? Why would you buy if you want to build a plant to provide all sorts of products to the American market, you know what you can do? You can build it in Canada. Where they're not going to change all their laws and the plant can sit there for 50 years and it'll work, number one.
Right.
And number two, we do fetishize manufacturing in this country, right? We talk about the sock capital of America and the furniture capital of America. Those were remarkable days when the middle class was built on working in factories and doing that. We are in a world of automation. We want jobs for people. We should be manufacturing more in America, but we fetishize this concept of the factory town. And we need to get away from that. We need to have a 21st century view of what manufacturing looks like. We got another question here.
Because we're a service economy now. We're
a service economy. That's right. We're not.
Yeah.
Everybody should have some manufacturing, right? We learned this during COVID. Everybody should have facilities to manufacture vaccines. You have to have some, but we fetishized it.
And also chips, like semiconductors.
Very important.
And that was something that Biden world tried to do, which I think Trump world has canceled some of.
Yes. Amy is writing, what was the nuclear complex in Isfahan destroyed? Will Trump declare victory tonight? You know, here's the thing, Amy. I wish we knew. I wish we knew. And when you cannot trust your own government, it would be reasonable for Americans to not trust anything the Iranian government said, because A, they're not your government.
Right.
B, they're not elected. They're not accountable to anybody. So you have no idea whether they're lying or telling the truth. I don't, They could be telling the truth all the time. They could be lying all the time. You have no way of determining that fact, right? But Donald Trump told us in June that he destroyed nuclear facilities. And then suddenly in March, we're in a war with Iran about nuclear facilities. Then they're going to talk about the Isfahan facility. We just don't know. We don't know. We don't know if the facilities are destroyed. And quite importantly, we also don't know if the enriched uranium is destroyed.
Right.
And there's some talk about sending the Marines in to just recover the uranium. That's a hell of a thing. Sending troops in to go into a country. I mean, you have to have complete air superiority.
Right.
You've got to have a lot of stuff happen to make that make sense. But imagine if our government had been honest with us from the beginning. Again, did they destroy Iran's nuclear capability last June, or did they not? Donald Trump was very clear that they did. In which case,
Right.
why would you need the war? Now, he makes an interesting argument, Amy, that back then it was about nuclear capability. Now it's about ballistic missile capability. And those things are different, and that might be true. But I've never seen such a lack of clarity.
Right.
If my fellow countrymen are going to war and are going to die, and if schoolgirls in Iran are going to die, and if little children are going to die throughout Israel and the Arab world in my name, I'd really
Right.
like to know what this is about. My general choice would be nobody should die in my name. But at least I'd like to know that the world's safer. Donald Trump said earlier, I think we can play this. I'm not sure which one it is, but he was in the White House in the Oval Office, and he was talking about how much safer the world is right now. Not sure I can find it. You got okay. Christina says she's got it. Let's listen to what he has to say about feeling safer. That's coming in a second. We'll bring it up in just a second.
I mean, and then I would also, at some point, I think we should talk about his approval rating, because every element here has gotten him to a place where he is like in Nixon land. I mean, just
Totally. On the topics that he ran on, that's the irony. On the things
Yeah.
that he ran on, the economy and immigration, he's underwater. It's not like other stuff. First of all, let's see what he had to say about safety, and then let's touch on that.
A couple of questions for you on Iran, but first one that affects Americans here at home: gas prices. Today they hit $4.
We have $4, yeah, and we have a country that's not going to be throwing a nuclear weapon at us in
Of
6
course,
months.
but Americans are feeling the effects in the interim. Of
And
this
they're also
operation.
feeling a lot safer.
What is the plan to bring them back down?
All I have to do is leave Iran, and we'll be doing that very soon. And they'll become tumbling down. And stock prices were up today almost to a record.
I don't know what he's talking about. Stock prices were up today almost to a record. That's just not true. We're not even close. We were in correction territory. But this whole business about people are feeling safer. Iran and Iran's not going to be throwing a nuclear weapon at us in 6 months. There was no chance that Iran, we don't know that they have a nuclear weapon at all that they can throw at anyone. They do not have ballistic missile capability to reach the United States at all under any circumstances. We have troops in the Middle East, lots of them, upward of 50,000, probably 60 or 70,000 right now. They are susceptible, as we have seen. But there was no missiles going from Iran to America, and definitely no missiles with nuclear capability. So tell me again how we're safer.
Well, this is the thing where he sort of panics and he says, like, we were going to do it. It was because it was 2 weeks. I had a feeling, he just is sort of going down this road. And remember, this is a question. The original question was about gas prices.
Yeah.
So,
yes, correct.
And I think how we get to this place is that Donald Trump is unable to think through second order effects.
Right.
So, it worked really well in Venezuela, whatever worked means, because it's basically the same in Venezuela, except maybe Trump says we get the oil. Again, we have no evidence that will be proven true either. And remember, they did have that whole meeting where they were meeting with these oil companies for them to say, like, we have opened Venezuela to you, and it was met with less than enthusiasm. So I do think that, but when we look at Trump at this moment and we look at like him sort of trying to figure out the calculus, I do think a lot of how we got here is he's just unable to look past the sort of first action to see that, like, if you did this, it would raise gas prices. And we're going into a summer now of gas prices, which is going to be, I think, a problem for him.
But do you
A summer
remember
and then a
some
midterm.
weeks ago, you and I were talking, and it was it was Pam Bondi being deposed in Congress about Epstein.
Yeah.
And there was a very specific question asked about Epstein and the prosecution of people in the Epstein case. And her answer was,
I know exactly. I was actually thinking, go.
right? It was about
Yeah.
the stock market and unemployment, and that's what we should be talking about. So it doesn't matter what you ask these people. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what you ask these people. If you ask them about the weather, they'll talk about snakes. If you ask them
Yeah.
about Epstein, they'll talk about the stock market. If you ask them about gas prices, they'll talk about nuclear weaponry. It's just a game to these people.
But my favorite part of that Pam Bondi testimony was she said, the Dow is at 50,000. Have you even thanked President Trump?
Right.
And since then, that was the peak of the market.
Yeah, that was the beginning of the market. It's like, okay, and he was bragging in the State of the Union about the gas prices. He talked about there being $1. They were never $1 anywhere.
Right.
But he talked about them being $1. Now they're $4. And in some places they're close to $6. You wanted to talk about approval ratings. Let's look at Donald Trump's approval ratings. We have several of them because people always say you pick the ones you like. So let's look at 4 different Trump approval ratings here. University of Massachusetts Amherst, approval 33%, disapproval 62%. Economist YouGov, approval 35%, disapproval 58%. Quinnipiac, approval 38%, disapproval 56%. AP NORC, approval 38%, disapproval 60%. Underwater with everything. And I will say there's some magic to these numbers that all start with a 3, right?
Right.
Whether 33, 35, 38, 38. That's the equivalent, in my opinion, of 0 for most people, because Donald Trump doesn't ever seem to get below 33%.
Right.
I think he can set 33% of Americans on fire and they would still support him.
Right. That base is pretty sticky.
Yes.
But there's this CNN Trump approval crosstabs which has him underwater with no college whites. That group has been his sort of a secret sauce, right? Like that he gets those people to vote for him. They're not necessarily engaged and they vote for Trump. And they were at one time, that coalition of non-college educated white people were at one time Democrats in the, decades ago. So I do think you're seeing that. But also when you break down on the crosstabs, when you look at the approval ratings per subject, immigration and the economy, his two sort of best issues are it's over for those two.
Let's talk about Congress. There would have been a simple solution to this war, and that is that within 24 hours of it starting that Saturday morning, Donald Trump or the administration and the Department of Defense would have gone to Congress, made the case, and Congress would have given them an authorization for the use of military force. There's an authorization for the use of military force that's been around since 9/11 that has been broadened to address terrorist groups. So it wasn't specifically about ISIS because ISIS wasn't there at the time, but it was deemed to be valid for those purposes. We're apparently using it for everything. So this is
right.
A, it's a war, and B, it's an illegal war. Donald Trump won't call it a war because he knows it's an illegal war. I would argue that no matter where you stand on the political spectrum, if you're Congress and you're the Speaker of Congress, you would like to protect your authority as Congress as given to you by the Constitution and do something about this. But I would surmise that incorrectly.
So I think the problem was when you put Mike Johnson in this job, he really got this job because he was a Trump sycophant. That was it. He did what Trump wanted. Remember this cabinet, so many things the lesson Trump learned from Trump 1.0, you got to have people who are sycophants. You got to have people who are just completely with the program and won't do anything to dissent. And so he found Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson, remember, was not like number 2 in leadership or number 3.
It took him 15 tries to become Speaker.
Right. Yeah, and he was like a sort of little-known backbencher that people thought was cheerful, but was not known in any, and you had Tom Emmers, you had people who were definitely more in a position to get the speakership who did not get it. And then Mike Johnson basically just gave away all his power to Donald Trump because he was there serving at the pleasure of Donald Trump. And what you saw, and I think this is interesting, is like you've seen him when things get too hot, and it makes sense because he has no leadership experience. He just shuts down Congress and he sends everybody home on vacation. So when the Epstein files discharge petition, and again, this may sound really nerdy, but it's important. So discharge petitions are not how any of this is supposed to work. They are these sort of ways in which you can get a bill going that doesn't have leadership's buy-in, that it's kind of going rogue.
Yeah.
And for years and years and years, you could not do this. Like Nancy Pelosi, if you had leadership that was running a tight ship, none of this would ever work. But because you have Mike Johnson, who basically doesn't really know how to do this anyway,
Right.
All of these discharge petitions have gone to the floor, gotten voted on, and passed, including the one that released all the Epstein files. And when that discharge petition was about to get signed, or right after it got signed, Johnson couldn't handle it, so he just sent everyone home.
Send everybody home, yeah.
Yeah, because that was sort of his only move. And that's what we saw more recently.
So there appears to be some sort of deal in Congress to end the DHS shutdown. I say there appears to be because one just never knows with this Congress. But there seems to be something going on here. I don't know. I don't know how to evaluate it.
I mean, so from what I understand from just the punch bowl, Jake Sherman from Jake Sherman, who covers the House for just a lot, and that's what he does, and that's all he does, the House and the Senate, is that there was this original deal that the Senate had passed. Remember, John Thune, who has in some ways the worst job in Congress right now, they did put together a deal, to fund Homeland. And what happened was the House, Republican on Republican legislative violence, right? Not violent, obviously, but it's a metaphor. You saw the Freedom Caucus go to war with the leadership over this bill, and then they blew it up, and then everyone went home, which is not the way to do this. So I guess what has happened is Mike Johnson has talked. My guess is he's talked the Freedom Caucus off the ledge, and they're just going to pass the reporting is they're just going to pass the Senate bill, which was what they were supposed to do 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Or 41 days ago, or whatever, 2 weeks ago, before they went on vacation.
Donald Trump says he cares about no other bills in the House except the Save America Act.
Yes.
A little bit different. The Save Act in the House and the Save America Act, they're actually different. He is obsessed with non-citizens voting, which is a statistical nothing. He's obsessed. He went to the Supreme Court today to listen to the hearings on birthright citizenship. He's obsessed with that too. Yeah. It all seems to have this idea that there are these immigrants who come in and somehow work our system. Kaiser Family Foundation, KFF, put out some news that said the instances of non-citizens using Medicaid, again, is close to nothing. There was a report out that of all the people, maybe I'm making the number up, but something like 70% of everybody who was swept up in Minneapolis in these ICE raids had never committed any crime in their life.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's true across the board. Even with them arresting people who are not here legally, very few of them are actually.
And half the time, the crime is the actual crime of being in the country.
Which
right?
technically was a civil violation until Trump changed it.
That's correct. So again, this might be why he's underwater on immigration, in that he said he was going to take out murderers, rapists, the worst of the worst. He called them bad hombres in 2015. Right. But there was some sense that, okay, if you're going to take out violent criminal illegal aliens, that might be something I could get my head around. And it's just not turned out to be the case. In fact, I've been traveling a lot recently, and I keep going through airports, and I see these ICE people, and I think to myself, a TSA agent never threatened me. I always thought, you know what, for better or for worse, your job, a little inconvenient making me take my shoes off and stuff, but you're generally trying to keep us safe, right? Trying to keep weapons off the plane and bombs off the plane and trying keeping me safe. I don't have that association with ICE. No. Like, you're the guys who are going to keep the bad guys from getting on the plane? In fact, I think we've got a question on this. It's a video question, so let's roll that.
Yes.
My question would be just if there are ways that we can protect ourselves and others in the world right now with, ICE agents in airports and just everywhere on the streets. If there's ways we can protect ourselves and others beyond just recording and documenting. I think that's a question I think that's on a lot of people's minds.
What a great question. What a kind soul who wishes to understand how they can better protect. I will say last Saturday was a good example. That No King stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think No Kings is a great example. I also think sue them, right? Like what we see is the people who have been arrested or who have been swept up, they win in the courts because
Yes.
none of this is legal.
Yes.
And so that's a really great example. But, there are all sorts of nonviolent ways to express your First Amendment rights.
Yep.
Protest is definitely one of them. They're calling your congressman, your senator.
Marjorie Taylor Greene brings us up all the time, right? Her phones are ringing off the hook with Medicaid cuts and ACA stuff. I mean, it works.
And they look at the number of phone calls they get. Like this is the kind of thing, we are still a democracy.
Yes.
And so our leaders still serve us, despite the fact that Trump may think, and again, it gets that court decision. I think about that court decision yesterday with the appointed judge who said, you are here to keep the White House for the next, right? It's not your house. And I mean, ultimately, that is what our government is supposed to be doing.
There's a question here. It says, will there be any way we can slow down President Trump's push for executive powers and clear overreach? Yup. The elections.
Yeah.
Primaries and the elections. That is, I remind people, I thought it was great to see all those people out for No Kings, and I think there should be more of that, and I think it empowers people. But it's practice. It is practice for the fundamental big part of democracy, which we still have. We still have agency, and we still have our vote. This is not optional. It never should have been optional. But now it's about getting several other people around you to come out and say, I know you don't think government works in your interests all the time, and that's a really good discussion for us to have once we've reclaimed our democracy.
Right.
Right. But if you let this go, then you can be sure government's not going to work in your interest for a long time. And by the way, this executive overreach, we've never seen it the way we've seen it with Donald Trump.
Right.
But this has been going on for a while with presidents, Democratic and Republican. Time for Americans to say, show up and vote in midterm elections, show up and vote in local elections, show up and vote in state elections, show up and vote for your members of Congress because they actually are closer to you and represent you, and insist that they actually do their job in holding the federal government to account. And that's important.
And I also think calling Democratic representatives, Democratic senators, like you may think, well, they're on a different side than Trump, but the American people are really angry. And I'm not sure the Democratic leadership really sees that anger. And so those phone calls to your Democratic leaders are just as important as the ones to Republicans.
And look, there are valid, as there always should be in political parties amongst members, criticisms going on about the Democratic Party. I think you and I have been talking about this for months. I think what we've learned is that most voters, and as we've seen this in the 30 seats that have flipped from Republicans to Democrats, state legislator seats, there have been 0 that have flipped the other way around. People are choosing fighters. Right? They're a little less concerned about where you are on the political spectrum specifically. And I'm not saying that that's a non-concern that Democrats should think about, but look like you are prepared to stand up and fight against autocracy and against those who will take your freedoms away. That's what I think voters will get excited about. It's what people got excited about in these protests. There is still some time. There's not a lot of time, Molly. And if people mess this up in November, we could be in for big trouble.
Yeah. I think that's right.
But we're close. I don't know how much you're following this Artemis launch. I'm kind of excited about it. I will say there are very few things that get me excited. It's out of politics.
You love space.
I love space. I'm a little sad because I think for a lot of reasons it's not the thing that brought us together the way it used to. The government used to be, NASA and the government and rocket launches and space shuttles used to be a thing that when it was happening, everybody you knew was watching it and paying attention to it. Now it's less so. Now there's a lot of well, shouldn't we spend money on this and shouldn't we spend money on that? But it is one of the very few things that we're excellent at and can be excellent at and will serve us long after all this politics is going on. So I have to say I'm a little bit excited about
Yeah, and
rocket launch.
going to the moon. I mean,
Yeah.
Germany.
It's
You
pretty
actually
cool
told me
going
that you
to the moon.
participated in the
yeah, moon is exciting, and this is to do more interesting science stuff. And if it gets people excited about science,
I'm
that's
I'm
great.
happy about that.
Yeah.
Molly, and yeah, we're looking at pictures right now of the preps for this, so I'm excited about that. Molly, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for
this
having
week.
me.
Always my pleasure. And
Really
thank
fun.
you to all of you out there. Remember, you can send us your questions anytime. You don't have to wait for us to be on the show. VelshieRule at ms.now. Send it all week because we can prepare answers for you and we can have graphics made and nothing off limits. Just ask us anything you like. Thank you again for joining us today. Have yourselves a great week. And Molly, I'll see you on TV soon.
Thanks. Bye.